Soldier On acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia. We recognise their continuing connection to traditional lands and waters and would like to pay respect to their elders, both past and present. Soldier On would also like to acknowledge the unique nature of military service and the valuable contribution made by former and current defence members and their families to our nation. Thank you to Legacy House for generously providing the filming space for this episode. Content warning. The following episode may contain personal accounts of service, trauma, and mental health. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome to Saluting Their Service, Contemporary Voices of Bravery. This is a podcast which explores stories of veterans who have served and their journey after transitioning into civilian life. My name is Jason Isaac. I'm a Senior Program and Engagement Officer at Soldier On. And today I'm joined by Joe Piasecki. Welcome.
Thanks, Jace. Good to be here.
Thanks for joining us. Now, Joe, you served with the Royal Australian Navy as an engineer technician for 9 years. And before we go into talking about your service, let's start at the very beginning. You know, what led you to join the Royal Australian Navy and what was your life before you joined?
Oh, the very beginning. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, look, I finished high school in Perth, grew up over there. And there was a lot of pressure at the time. You know, it's like school kids and you've got to have your life all together. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I didn't know what was best for me. And I did all right at school. But there was pressure from parents, school, everyone to have a solid career locked in. It was like, go to university, get an apprenticeship. And there was those two schools of thought. And I went and did neither of those. I ended up living in the Pilbara. I went and straight out of high school, I went and lived up on a cattle station that was over 1 million acres in size, and we'll come back to that as we go. But I then spent a couple of years just getting to know who I was as a person up in the bush, and I love being up there. I love the country, and it's where I went from being a 17-year-old surfy kid to sort of being a young man, you know, and I hold that experience of a couple of years in the bush across the top of WA. I spent some time in the Territory, and then eventually ended up in central Queensland, and that's where this was the first major hook in my career, where I went from, you know, being a bush kid, riding horses, mustering cattle, and then I went and got an apprenticeship as a fitter and turner with Rio Tinto up in Gladstone in central Queensland. So, and then to sort of answer your question about what sort of prompted me to join the military was, it's not a great story. Like, I know people talk about having aspirations of wanting to join the Navy or the Army from when they were born, that type of thing. Like, that was not my journey. I was living in central Queensland. I'd just broken up with my partner at the time. I wasn't in a great state, and I very clearly remember it being Christmas Day. I was all by myself. I had no one around me because I grew up in Perth, so I had all my family and friends and across that way. And so I was quite isolated in central Queensland. And Christmas Day, I saw the ad campaign. So 7 days in the Navy. You know, join the Navy. It was like, there was all this great footage of like going on ships and, you know, like people wearing cool uniforms and guns and stuff. Like it was a really, really good ad campaign. And I saw it and I went, yeah, that looks all right. And so I rang up the recruitment hotline, and being Christmas Day, obviously there was no one there. So I called back a couple of days later and then I explained what I was doing as a fitter and turner apprentice. And they went, you'd be great as an engineering techo, as a stoker. And I was like, okay. So then I just went through the process. I was in pretty good fitness at the time, so I didn't find the physical element challenging at all. I didn't have any major injuries to disclose. And And yeah, I literally, my expectations were nil. It was more a case of what's next for me. But yeah, so then I joined the Navy, and I remember in recruitment they said to me, "You should be a submariner. You should sign up, be a submariner." And I was like, "Oh, look, I don't know. I'd never seen a submarine, and I didn't know anything about them, and I hadn't really put heaps of thought into joining the Navy." I was like, for me, it was more, it was about continuing that technical trade. That's what was important to me at the time, was leaving Central Queensland and continuing on and somehow completing this apprenticeship. And of course, I was promised the world, which, look, I ended up doing. I ended up finishing the apprenticeship and getting qualified and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it was very much about that skills piece for me and the experience. And so, went from being a stockman, ringer, country kid to being a fitter and turner at Rio Tinto, and then all of a sudden I'm dressed in uniform at recruit school at Cerberus. And it was a pretty wild journey, sort of getting there. And I did not join as a direct entry submariner, but my recruit school leader, who I still sort of maintain contact with him, he was a submariner. And in recruit school, he was like, "Mate, you'll love it." And I was really fortunate that in recruit school, I got the opportunity to go across to Stirling and have a look on board. I went on board Collins. I went on board Collins as a week 10 recruit, and I went, yeah, this looks all right. Yeah, I'll do this. And so I did. I got back, and the recruit instructor said to me, "What do you reckon? You doing it?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So I went, okay. So I put in my paperwork and it got accepted. And yeah, then nothing really changed because I still had to do the initial schooling at the engineering faculty. And then, yeah, upon completion of the engineering schooling, that's when I went across to Stirling and started the submarine training. And that was very, like, that qualification process of becoming a submariner is something I'd love to sort of talk a bit more about. But that was one of the things that really that I really enjoyed with my service, was becoming a submariner. Like, there's so few of them. Like, I don't know the numbers, but I was always sort of led to believe there's about 10,000-ish in the Navy, and there's maybe a couple of hundred submariners.
Yeah. So, like, going back to, you share, living in regional Australia, you're in the outback. As you said, you're a bush kid, you had a lot of experiences, on the land, and some might say naturally, people might like to go to the army for that sort of thing because you're in the bush, you're out in the field, you've got your field skills and your craft, right? But it's interesting, and what's remarkable about your story is that you go towards being a submariner, which is probably the most confining space within the Defence Force that you could probably find.
Well, I think that's kind of my claim to fame. I don't know anyone who can top going from such a large, expansive space. So this cattle property that I spent 3 years living on was 1.2 million acres. And then
Huge.
Fast forward a few years, and I've lived inside a 77-meter submarine. So, like, I challenge anybody to have a go at beating that record. I mean, there's not that many cattle stations that are much larger than that, and there's just not that many submariners. So I think I've got a unique life experience there. But no, you're right. Like, and I think why I chose Navy over Army, because you're right. Like, a lot of people spend time in the bush and they want to drive machines. And like, I drove graders and loaders and those. I drove all the machines. I drove a truck. I drove a triple trailer road train before I had a car license.
Yeah, wow.
But yeah, so no, the reason I chose Navy rather than Army based on that experience was the fact that there was a critical shortage of stokers in the Navy. And when I sort of said what I was doing, I'd almost finished an apprenticeship, and they said, "Oh, mate, Navy stoker, you're in." And I do remember there was an option for some sort of Army technical person. I don't even remember what the role was, but I was like, whatever's going to get me out of Central Queensland the quickest, I'm there. And so they sold me the dream, and I went, that'll do. And so I never really gave any serious consideration to any other role or any other service. It was like, no, this seems to fit my life right now. I'm going for it.
Now, you used the term before, stoker. Now, there's probably listeners that will be listening to us today and going, what is a stoker? Can you unpack like what a stoker is within the Royal Australian Navy?
It's, if you think about a ship or a submarine as like a little self-contained city, and to physically run that city, you need power, water, sleeping, anything to do with systems on board is something that a stoker would normally manage. Like, I know the greenies will get weird and be like, oh no, we do the electrical, but anyway, greenies are the electronic technicians. So the stoker is, the longhand is a marine technician. So the marine technician, an MT, is basically someone, a sailor who is responsible for managing the plant and equipment, keeping the submarine and the ship going forward, keeping the power on, keeping the systems working, and making sure that the vessel has the ability to operate at sea so that all the other people can do their jobs. Because if you've got warfare people, or you've got sonar people, or you've got navigation people, they can't do their job if you're tied up alongside. If the boat's not at sea and not doing well, then it inhibits your ability to do what the military is designed to do, which is, do what the government says. You've got to go to place X. Well, then you need to get there. And it's the engineering team's responsibility to get that thing to that place, in really layman's terms.
Yeah. Now, let's dive a little bit deeper into, some...
Submarine pun intended?
Yes, yeah, that's right. How deep does a submarine go?
That is something I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah, right. I knew. For those that are listening, it is classified. You can't share that information. But Joe, please share a little bit more about some defining moments within your career as a submariner.
I think the most important thing about being a submariner is the little badge you wear, is the Dolphins badge that signifies that you're a qualified submariner. That is a badge that you wear on your uniform on your left-hand side, closest to your heart. And that is a real badge of honor, in my opinion. And it's something I was very proud to achieve it. And I'm still very proud to wear those Dolphins, because whilst submarine service comes with its challenges, when you see someone wearing those Dolphins on their chest, it means something special. And that's something that I'm very proud of. And I think whilst submariners typically don't have a lot of medals, because a lot of the stuff that we do is classified, having that submariner qualification and that badge that you wear is something that a lot of people aspire to. And it's also it's also something that a lot of people go, not for me. People say that and they go, submariner, not for me. There's such a lack of understanding, even within the military, about what submarine service is like. One thing that, like the motto of the submarine service is remain undetected. If people know where a submarine's been, you've failed. And that means that you have to operate in a certain way. And when I think about some very brief stints that I did on surface ships, it's different. It's so different. Like, going to sea on a submarine is something that you train a lot for. Like, when you go through that qualification process, you have to learn about everything, all the systems. So, like, you would do the stoker thing, and that's totally expected. You would learn about high pressure air. You'd learn about hydraulics. You'd learn about, the electrical systems. But then what you also have to learn, which you don't do on a surface ship, is you had to learn about how the combat system works. You'd have to learn about sonar. You'd have to learn about warfare, and you'd have to learn about the submarine as a whole. And I think that's where I was going, is that being a submariner is very holistic to the platform, whereas I don't feel that's the same on a surface ship. And I'm happy to be wrong, but in my brief experience, it didn't feel like people on the ship had a holistic view. I imagine the top dogs, like the senior people on the ship, would definitely have that view. But one thing that, like, submariners do really well is right from the bottom of the pecking order, like right from a trainee through to the chef, to the sonar techs, to everybody. Like, everybody has that understanding about the whole platform. And that's one thing that makes submariners really special, is that no matter what it is, you've got a base level of knowledge. and everybody on that submarine knows how to save the submarine in the event of an emergency. So like everybody from the cook to the captain knows how to surface the submarine, knows how to put out fires, knows how to stop HB airbursts, knows how to make a hydraulic system safe if it's leaking. And I really love that. I love the fact that there was cross-pollination of skills, and that to me underpins why submariners have each other's backs, because because the place you live, this tin can underneath an ocean, is a functioning little city of elite people, I think. But yeah, I look at my submarine service very fondly. I'm very proud of being a submariner.
And so you should be. I mean, the story you're sharing, military in general builds a culture of camaraderie because we put our lives in each other's hands. Everyone's expected to do a job. And if you do that job well, then you're looking after your oppo beside you. What you're explaining, though, is very specialized and unique version of camaraderie because, as you say, you're on a submarine, you're in waters, doing operations, and every person, every function needs to be reliant on each other, probably a little bit more so than some of the other parts of service. It's all important, but it's actually critical when you're on a submarine, right?
Yeah, I agree. And it's like when you go places and do things, there's a greater appreciation about why we train the way we play, because it's very difficult to just go to sea and operate as a highly functioning team and to hold yourself to account. Like everybody knows if you bang that door or you drop that spanner or you accidentally put a light on or something like that, you've got to be accountable to yourself because you understand, and I think this is something that submariners do really well, is you understand your place in the mission. Whilst you might be a chef or you might be a stoker or you might be the captain, you've all got a role to play. And that's one thing that I think probably isn't as clear for people on ships, especially like the lower down you go, you don't have that picture about why you're there and why your job's important. Whereas on a submarine, everyone does. And, I've done a bunch of classified stuff and I'll never tell anyone about it. And that's because I know that it's important and I know my place and I know that I'm accountable. So even all these years on, this stuff, I won't make comment on whether it will or won't be classified or declassified. But, people ask me like, how deep does a submarine go? I'm not telling you. And that's because I know how important that is. And that's something that submariners are particularly good at, is just understanding their role, whatever it may be, forms a part and to be accountable to that part of it. So I think that for me is probably one of the defining characteristics of my career, was that I got to experience what it was like to do the thing. I know that there's a lot of people that have joined the military, they either don't feel like they achieved everything they wanted to achieve, or they compare themselves. Like veterans are so bad at comparing themselves. Oh, my service doesn't matter because I didn't do this or I didn't do that. But I'm really proud of the fact that I got to do the thing, right? Submarines, contrary to popular belief of a civilian, is they are not yellow. You would be surprised how many people ask me that. Like people, when I mention the word submarine, people go, "Oh, are they yellow?" And the answer is no. And then the very next question I normally get is one of the two following: do you get claustrophobic, or do they have windows? And the answer to both of those is no. I've never been claustrophobic, except for one. I'll tell you that shortly. And then the third question I typically get is, how deep can they go? And that's not a question I'll answer. So yeah, that shows to me that broader knowledge of submarines is basically nil. They're comparing us to a song from the Beatles. And submarine is for reconnaissance, for spying on people. So they're black, like they're incognito. And and maybe I'll go into this now. Like the one time that I did get slightly claustrophobic on a submarine was when I had to pull out the daily bilge pump which was in a machinery space. And the only way to get out there was to go underneath the deck plates, right up against the pressure hull at the bottom of the submarine in a bilge. So a bilge is the lowest part of a ship, and it's typically where a ship or a submarine, it's typically where the water and oil and condensate and all the stuff kind of drops into. And submarines being round, it's obviously, it can be quite deep.
Yeah, right.
At the bottom. So anyway, so I've gone into this bilge and we're at sea, and we had to do something to this pump because it had like burnt itself out. I can't remember. But in going out underneath that deck plate, I was on my back between two T-frames. So the T-frames are just like what support the pressure hull. So I'm wedged between two T-frames, and I've got my hands above my head, and I'm trying to undo, I think I was trying to undo the pulley to the thing, doing something mechanical. And I've slipped. So I was balancing precariously on a pressure valve, on hull valve. So there was a bit of pipe work in a bit of an L shape, and I had my butt on that, and I was kind of being supported with the two T-frames on my shoulders, and I am quite broad across the shoulders. So I was kind of doing it. I can't remember what happened, but I've slipped, and my hips have slid down in between the L bend of pipe and the T-frame, and I was wedged. I got stuck. I got completely stuck out there, and I couldn't move. And because I had my hands above my head, my shoulders dropped in under the T-frames, and I was completely stuck. I couldn't move, and so I was in an awkward position with my hips sort of twisted to the left and my shoulders under the T-frame. And I still remember the guy. His name was Jamie. I said to Jamie, "Hey mate, I reckon I'm stuck." And he looks down at me from above and says, "Oh," and he's passed me down a rope. Like we were passing tools that way, and he's passed me down the rope. And I couldn't even get it. I had like T-Rex arms. I was like, And for that moment, because I was down so close to the bilge, I was on the pressure hull, I was underneath the deck plate, and I was stuck. There was about 15 seconds there. I remember thinking like, whew, if something goes awry here right now, I'm dead. Like I can't get out of here. And so I said to Jamie, "Mate, you're going to have to get my ankles and you're going to have to drag me out." And the tricky bit about that machinery space in particular is that there's a large electrical cabinet almost directly opposite. So there's almost no room. And so this guy was a trainee, and he's probably one of the best Part 3 trainers I've ever seen. I reckon I'm connected with him somehow. But I remember the guy, and he said to me, "Yeah, right, okay." And so anyway, he's passed a rope down, and basically had to get dragged out. And I still have scars on my back from getting dragged over the bolts on the flange of that bit of pipe. And I've still got scars on my back and shoulders from where I had to get dragged out. And once I got out, we laughed about it and kind of moved on, and then had to figure out a new way of getting this repair done. And the short version was I had to send Jamie in because I didn't fit. So anyway, we got it done. But that was the only time I think I've ever been claustrophobic, was that point in time where I was wedged at sea on a submarine, and it was awful. And so not having been claustrophobic at any point previous to that, because one of the things that you work out during your qualification phase to become a submariner is you've got to have psych screenings and interviews and stuff, and they work that all out, because if you do get claustrophobic, you may not be the best fit for being a submariner. But anyway, that was the one time that I had a bit of a scare, and I don't envy anyone who gets claustrophobic. And that's I've had my wife on on Deshana on one of the boats, and she hated it.
So talking about, like, I've heard you talk about this before, where on a ship, obviously, there is a lot more space. In a submarine, every single space is used, right? So being in tight, confined spaces, you've got to be comfortable with it. And I'm sure that throughout submariners' careers, there are probably little moments like what you've shared where you got stuck and you had a moment of getting claustrophobic, but that was a once-off. But I'm sure that some people might struggle sometimes where they don't realise they're claustrophobic. They go through the psych tests, they go through all the evaluations. Is there moments, like if someone does identify, you know what, I can't do this anymore, what happens to those people? I mean, obviously there's not many submariners. So how do they work that out? Like, do they?
Yeah, and I won't speak on behalf of other people and whether or not they feel claustrophobic, but what I would say is that um, there there is always conflict, and I think what you're talking about is how do we manage hard situations when we can't get away from it,
Mm,
and whether it's claustrophobic, whether you're having a beef with someone else, whether there's some kind of incident, whether there's something petty like we're having a quiz night and we're disagreeing on an answer for it. I think resilience is something that submariners have in spades, and the ability to navigate problem solving, I think, is one thing that is extremely heightened in the submarine community. It's because there is no getting away from it. You literally can't go anywhere. And if you're not a stoker or a technical person, I mentioned before the submarine is 77 meters in length. All the vast majority of that is systems and engine spaces. So if you're not a technical person, you really only have two places to go. That's like the mess where you eat, sleep, drink, um, and your position on watch, and that might
mm,
be in front of a console. So really, like if you're a there's not a lot of places to hide, is what I'll say, and that's where I think we're good at sorting things out. You know, if there's a
mm.
beef or there's something we need to work through, we just get on and do it.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, we what I've taken away from that is that, yeah, look, you are in a confined space together, and it's mission first.
Mm.
So whatever you've got going on, whether it be health, whether it be personal, whether it be, you're struggling in your role, well, there's a period of time you have to see it through
Yeah.
because the mission, the job, it's critical that you remain on and you're switched on. So having, I guess, the strategies, then the abilities to be able to just go, you know what, let's move beyond what that challenge is right now and let's get on with the job, because it's not necessarily just about yourself. It's about the wider team. It's about that survival
Yeah,
mindset.
great. It's mission first.
Mm,
Um, and I think that's something that civilians don't understand. They
mm,
don't get it. You know, like where you have to put your own baggage aside and you've got to move on with whatever it is. So I mean, I think when you mention submarines to the general public, like I said, you normally get the silly questions, but then one thing that veterans are really bad at doing is downplaying their service. And like I've gotten really good. I can nail it in one sentence and I can make it civilian friendly. And I'll say, look, I was one of the clowns that lived in a submarine under the ocean. Did it for nearly a decade. And I did something engineering flavored. And what that does is it brings you down to the level of the civilian's understanding, which is somewhat self-deprecating.
right.
So I think veterans, we need to get better at uplifting and educating rather than downplaying and hiding. And I think that's something that veterans are notoriously bad at is one, comparing their service to someone else. Oh, I wasn't a commando. It doesn't matter. I, I, I was only a grunt. Like it doesn't matter. I don't like that concept of I was only. You've served your country. You've given back to society, and we should be proud of that. And I think there's a lot of self conflict that veterans have about downplaying their service just to fit in. And I think there has to be an element of kind of bridging that understanding between what the civilians think you do and what you actually do. But what I would say to veterans is to be proud of it, and
Yeah.
where you can coach people into understanding that it was pretty special and it was honourable and you are proud of it. And I just think that there's such a good opportunity to broaden knowledge generally in society, and that means that you've got to spend time with people. I mean that
Yeah.
time element is something that nobody's got any time. So how you use your time is really important. If you give your time to someone else, it means a lot. And I think if you can explain to someone, hey, no, this is what I took away from the military, or this is what happened, or here's an experience, I think that time is really important because what that does is it broadens that understanding.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, because we've started to sort of talk about, looking at a veteran's service and, obviously them not downplaying their service, but, educating our general public on, yes, I served, this was my role in defence. And, I guess, like what you've referred to before, like wearing those dolphins with pride, uh, basically wearing our service with pride, is really important. And to help the public understand that when you sign the line, it's an open-ended contract with the government that you will serve and, give your life if need be.
I think the key thing there, and about the public and the understanding, is we're not all old blokes that served in Vietnam.
Mm.
Like, big respect and love to the older generation of veterans. But there's a heap of veterans leaving the military every year that are like in their 20s.
Yeah.
So now the contemporary veteran, that's a conversation I feel really strongly about. I was in my early 30s and I did nearly 10 years. And people go, oh, yeah, I don't picture you. You're not a veteran, are you?
Mm.
People think about veterans as the old blokes. And I think, yes, we need to acknowledge the old blokes who went through whatever it is they went through. But I also think we've got to acknowledge the young veterans, the contemporary veterans. There's a number, isn't there? Was it 10,000 leave the military every year or something? I don't know what the numbers is, but
I think it's around about between 6 to 10. Yeah. But yeah, it's quite a large number.
What that means is we've got a huge amount of people with varying experience, whether they've done a couple of days or they've done 10 years or they've done 20 years. I think that there's that period of young people that have got a long time left to work, and they can add so much to society. What I mentioned before about that resilience, the conflict resolution, the ability to be, good holistic thinkers, to have good leadership skills and discipline. These are all really valuable skills that the civilian sector needs. And I think there should be more focus on the contemporary veterans and the value that can be added to society. And that's something that I do for my work as well. Like, maybe we can go back that way and go. So transitioning out of defense, that sort of next journey for me beyond being a recruit instructor and convincing people to be submariners, which was great. But yeah, my own transition out of defense, it was weird. It was an odd day. Like, I remember the transition process for me, because I was an electrical sailor, a stoker, and they were not keen to let me go. I had to do the full 6-month period. And this is one of my gripes about the transition journey, is that how are you supposed to plan to get a job when you have to hand your notice in with 6 months' notice? So it's almost like you've got heaps of time to plan, but then you're not available.
Yeah.
And then you get to and in the civilian environment, 4 weeks' notice is pretty standard. So you resign, then you got to do 4 weeks, and then you can go to your next job. But then how do you then wait 5 months to start applying for jobs so that you're available? So that process of transitioning is really difficult because you've got so much lead time, but civilians don't understand. What do you mean you're not available for 4 months? I got offered 2 jobs and then I said the same thing. Oh, I'm not available for 4 months. And they're like, oh, soz, okay. And so I couldn't take the job. And that's what makes it difficult. But then if I think about what happened next, was that I got put in front of a company called Acciona, Coleman Rail, and I interviewed with them, and they said, we love it. We want veterans. We want you. We know the value the veterans bring. I was interviewed with a veteran, an ex-army guy, and I still speak to him now. And the reason my journey out of defense was fantastic was because I got picked up by a company that really wanted to hire veterans. They had a structured program. They walked me in the door and they said, we don't really care what your resume says. And I got to know, I had sort of 2 separate interviews. And they said, yeah, we are going to find a job for you. We want you in our business. And I was like, cool, all right. And then I got a call about maybe a week later. And this guy is still my mentor. He still looks out for me. So he calls me and says, hey, Joe, we've just got a warehouse. I want you to project manage it. Because this thing's empty. We've only just taken the lease out. I want you to set it up and run it from scratch in this rail environment. in this rail construction environment. They're a rail constructor. And I said to him, I'm not a logistics guy. My background's engineering. He goes, yeah, but you'll work it out, right? And I went, yeah, all right. And he goes, tell you what, meet me out there and I'll show you and you can make your mind up then. I was like, all right. So I rocked up. And again, this is not knowing, I turned up in a suit to this project management job. And he's like, why are you in a suit? I was like, I didn't know any better. I just assumed that this is what you're supposed to wear. He goes, and he take it off. So I took my tie, my jacket off, and we walked around this enormous warehouse, huge warehouse. And he said to me, we have got about 4 years worth of work here. And us having our own logistics facility is going to be really beneficial to the project. And he goes, I want you to set it up and run it from scratch. You in? And I went, yeah, all right, let's do this.
Yeah.
So he goes, cool. All right, I'll see you in 2 weeks. And then, turned up for my induction, got given some orange shirts, and then had to be in charge of setting up and running this whole facility from scratch. And it was a massive learning curve.
Yeah.
And what made that journey out was one that this organization had some really, really good people in it. And this guy, he mentored me. He took all of my silly questions. He sat down and explained to me about what specific things meant. And I can sort of get into that. But I got supported really well by this man and a few others in the business who knew with a bit of poking, a bit of prodding, I'd make a good employee.
Yeah.
And I did. I got promoted. And then, after about 6 or 8 months of doing that, warehouse functioning, got a full team of logistics people. I've got an inventory management system. I've got it all done. It's like I've made this thing work without any real knowledge. And that sort of plays into the theme. Been winging it.
Yeah,
my whole life I've been winging it. And I just worked it out. And
well, going back a little bit too, I mean, obviously, you've mentioned a couple of different challenges, obviously, with transition. You've got a great sort of person that's supporting you into a role to manage this warehouse, but it's still a very steep learning curve for you. The camaraderie is different. The environment's very different. The culture is different. You're going to now be working with civilians, So is there anything there that you would identify as being maybe a bit of a challenge or even a roadblock during that transition phase?
Well, everything you've just said, all of that stuff that you just said, I didn't know my place. I didn't understand organizational culture. I didn't understand the hierarchy. Like when you're in defense, you can look at a person in uniform and know within a second where they are, what rank they are, what they're doing. And I think most importantly, you know how to conduct yourself, compared to that person. So if that person is above you in rank, you would know to address them as such. And if a person is below you, so you know how to conduct yourself respective to other people's positions. And that's one thing I really struggled with. When I was out, everybody just wore either orange shirts or white shirts. And I didn't know the difference between the CEO or an admin person. And that's something that I articulated to Ty, his name is. I said to Ty, hey, who are all these people? What are they doing? And so I said, so what he did was he sat me down with an org chart and he showed me an organizational structure. This is what commercial do. This is what engineering do. This is what design do. This is what the comms and stakeholder people do. And he broke down each department and he spoke about people in those positions and he spoke about what they did for a job. And he's the kind of guy, he hangs a little, he's pretty funny. He's a funny guy and he tends to give people a bit of a hard time. So anyway, he's like, oh, these idiots do this and these idiots do that. But anyway, but what was important was that I didn't understand something and he walked me through it. And that way, when I saw, it was still difficult because you can't see people. You would be like, you're just a rich old white dude with a white shirt. And I don't know where you fit in the chart and I don't know how I'm supposed to act around you. And that was something that I personally think a lot of military people struggle with. And one thing that the civilian sector doesn't do is they're not good at really strongly structured hierarchy. Like in the chain of command within defense, it's like information flow goes here to here to here. And it's very structured. Whereas in the civilian market, like I thought it was wild that I could call the general manager.
Yeah.
He called me one day, and this guy was really supportive. You've met him. He was really, really supportive of me coming into the business, and it was him that was kind of the top-down push to get veterans in the job. And the fact that I had a direct line to the general manager, I found that weird. But that's just how it is. Like the hierarchy is very linear in defence, whereas it's chaos in the civilian sector. And I think that's one of the challenges that veterans need to navigate. And a simple way to do that is to do what happened to me. Have someone explain to you what all the different functions are. Say, oh, these guys, they put out spot fires when we make noise and annoy the neighbours from construction activities. This is what this team does. Yeah. And these designers, here's what they do. And he took the time. And I made that comment earlier about time. One thing I've always really respected about people, and in particular my mentor and the people who've supported me, is they've always given me time. And these people are busy. Like this guy now, my mentor, he's like the national head of something. And the fact that he still takes my calls is really important to me.
Yeah.
And I'm really pleased that I've been surrounded by good people. And I want to put a caveat on this, that I've had a fantastic transition out of defence. It wasn't easy, but it was good. And I'm really cognizant that a lot of veterans don't have that same experience. And I'm really sorry that veterans don't get that experience. And if anyone wants to reach out to me about, how do you navigate civilian bureaucracy? How do you get through these challenges? I'm here to support other veterans because I know what success can look like, because I'm the kind of lived example of that. This company had a great leader, had some great leadership in it. They plucked me out and they liked me as a person, so they gave me a crack. I'm not going to say they took a chance, because I don't like that deficit mindset of like, oh, well, we'll give them charity. Veterans don't want charity. Veterans want like a hand up, not a hand out.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this company did so well, is they gave me the opportunity to thrive. And like through my journey with leaving home, living in the bush, Rio Tinto, Navy, and now what I'm doing is my career trajectory has been dangerously non-linear, but I've always worked it out. I've always had opportunities to thrive. And I don't know whether that's just me or whether that's other people, but I'm a big believer in having a crack. Have a go.
Yeah.
And I think that's a hard thing to do, right? And some veterans just don't, and they're not able to, and that's fine. And I think there's a certain percentage of all those, whatever the number was, let's say it was 6,000 to 10,000 people leave every year. There's going to be a percentage of those that need help, support, therapy, and they need people to look after them. And that's okay. Yeah. And that's where you go to the likes of Soldier, you go to the likes of all the different support agencies. Those people need care, and we should look after them. There's also a huge percentage of people that are just looking for good jobs, that want good employers, and they might be in their 20s, they might be in their 30s, however old they might be. These contemporary veterans have got a long time left to work, and there's so much potential in the veteran community. So I think it's really important that more companies get on board with hiring veterans and doing what happened to me. Like I've been in a position where I've been able to give back to the veteran community because I really want to, but I've also had a journey that's led me to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that not a lot of veterans realize, the value that they can bring to a civilian environment. Yes, you'll need a little bit of support, a little bit of coaching. I'm going to ring and have some dumb questions. But if you can give someone that time and coach them and put them in a culturally appropriate workplace, then, we could see the next generation of contemporary veterans just thriving, killing it in the civilian sector, just getting really good jobs. And I think, it's that hand out thing. Veterans just want good jobs.
And when we look at transition, there are some that will come out that have, another challenge of finding that purpose. What gives them purpose? When you serve your country, there is a purpose attached to it, right? It's that service mindset. Now, what would you say to someone that is still looking for, where does my purpose belong? Where do I go? What do I do? And it could be an open-ended question, but, when you look to transition into something, is there something that you would offer someone to help them try and find that purpose?
That's a tough question because there's a lot of different directions you can go. And I think I'll stick with my theme, and something I'm very passionate about is seeking good employment. Because if you can get out of defence and land on your feet with a decent job that pays the bills, that gets you motivated to get out of bed every morning, and it gives you somewhere to go, you'll inherently make, you'll make connections. You may not call them friends, but you'll be around people. And especially if you can do that in a good veteran-friendly company. And what I think is important is that if you can establish that baseline of paying the bills and getting out of bed every day and going to work, and then the rest will come. Because I think that then alleviates some of the stresses that may come with discharge. Because if you leave and you don't get a job, you're not paying rent, you may not be eating, you might need to seek welfare. And it's like that, Maslow's hierarchy. Like if you can afford, if you have income, the rest of it comes. And I think for those people that struggle finding jobs, it can go so badly wrong for veterans. And I really empathise that it can be difficult to ask for help. And I think that's something that veterans don't do particularly well, is ask for help. And so what advice would I give? If you're able and wanting to work, give it a go. Try and find yourself a veteran-friendly company if you can. I mean, what's a great soft step out of defence is to work in defence industry. There's lots of fantastic organisations that are in defence industry that employ people who've served. Because, like let's use a company that builds ships, for example. If they're building ships, how valuable is someone who's served on a ship going to be to them?
Yeah, right.
So it makes a lot of business continuity. It makes good sense for them to employ people who've been in the Navy. So I guess the advice that I would give is, if you're able and you're willing and you're wanting to work, just look where defence is. Like there's companies that build ships, there's companies that build tanks, there's companies that do all the aerospace stuff. Like, look at what you've done in defence, and you don't have to have it all together. Like you don't have to. I think this is something that veterans don't do. Like when you get out, you don't have to find the perfect role. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just got to be the next step. It's got to be your first step out of defence, but it's not the last one. I just think that there's so much value in looking at yourself and saying, well, what can I do? Don't worry about translating resumes. Like that's one of the questions I sort of thought about on the way in this morning was, like what's something I wish I knew before I left defence? Don't waste time trying to civilianize your resume. I wrote heaps and heaps of resumes and cover letters. You're wasting your time, because a lot of the time, if you're applying through mainstream channels, civilian recruiters have a deficit mindset. They look at a resume and go, doesn't have what I need, bin. Has something on it I don't understand, bin. And so unfortunately, if a veteran's resume doesn't perfectly line up with whatever that employer is looking for, you're not getting the gig. Like the hardest part is getting through the resume phase. If you can get to an interview, I reckon most veterans can smash an interview. With a bit of coaching, a bit of support, and a bit of confidence, a veteran can normally represent themselves quite well. But getting to that stage of an interview is really difficult if you're applying through mainstream channels. And that's where, again, look to companies who want veterans, look to defence industry. Call Glenn and Rowie from Ironside Resources, and they know people. Ironside, they are a fantastic veteran recruitment agency. They're a social enterprise, and their mission is to get veterans jobs, and they've put thousands of veterans into jobs all over Australia, and I have huge respect for both those people. Glenn's ex-army and Rowie's a spouse, and they've got a good measure of what it takes to get civilian employers good talent. And my advice to people, again, is if you're able and willing and want to get a job, hit them up. Find other companies that want veterans, and that first layer of stability will come. Like if you can pay the bills and you can put food on the plate and you can get the kids to school and you can do whatever, then life becomes ultimately a little less scary. Yeah. And if you can't get there and you need support, and you need welfare, please ask for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like definitely taking the first step, whether it's the silver lining or not, it doesn't matter so much. It's about putting yourself out there, take the first step. There is organisations and a lot of support for our veterans and families. And you've touched on a couple of those areas. Um, when when a veteran taps in to a company, um, there are companies that are investing quite a lot of time and effort into, veteran recruitment strategies or looking at ways that can help a veteran or a family member understand why they are valuable within that workplace. And I know that you've spent quite a bit of time at, looking at strategies and looking at ways that would help a company be able to build maybe their veteran portfolio. Are you able to share a little bit about, what work you do that helps bridge those gaps?
Yeah, I think maybe rather than going straight to that example of the work I'm doing with a client right now, maybe I'll go back a little bit to what happened after the warehouse. So,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
so that'll help contextualize. So anyway, I got a call from Ty, my mentor, and he says, "Joe, you're going to get a call from the general manager. The answer you'll give him is yes." I was like, "All right, trust this guy. He'll be right." He did. The GM rang about 10 minutes later. He said, "Hey, Joe, our social procurement guy just quit. You're in." And I was like, "I don't know what that is, but yes, I'll do it." And that's sort of what led me to the work that I do now. So I've spent nearly 6 years across 2 mega projects in Victoria. So construction based. One was a rail job. One was the Northeast Link, so a road job. But in essence, what that term social procurement is about social value and legacy that is a positive byproduct of infrastructure spending. So what I mean by that is like we're going to build tunnels, going to build roads, whatever. We're building things, right? And my job has been to look at what are we giving back to society as a positive output of that. So yes, like there's a small percentage of the population that get really excited about the technicalities of tunnels and rail and stuff. That's cool. But the majority of people don't really care. They just get annoyed by projects being noisy and, stopping roads. But what my job was to do was to go, okay, well, how do we support the local community and how do we remove disadvantage as a positive impact of this job? And the jobs that I've been on are multi-billion-dollar jobs. So they can afford it. And so they should be giving back to society. So with what I do for work, I look at how we're procuring goods. Are we buying from, businesses that are owned by Indigenous peoples? Are we buying from businesses that support people with disability? Are we buying from businesses who employ veterans? Are we using the organization's buying power to make a difference and to employ people who need a chance? And like I mentioned before, like when a veteran applies through Seek or LinkedIn through like the mainstream channels, it's pretty tough to be successful. But then you have inclusive employment pathways, which is where I come in. So I'm not a recruiter, but I've helped heaps of people who face challenges get jobs. And that's looking at what those challenges are specifically and building programs around them. So like one program I'm really proud of was we did a migrants women program. So these are people that have come from overseas that have fled mostly war-like scenarios. Most of the come through have been refugees. And we did a work experience program. And some of the challenges these women face was, they fled the country. Often their English isn't great. Their qualifications may not be recognized. All of these barriers. And so my job was to build a program that helped navigate those barriers. And so there's this whole thing about local experience. But people from overseas, it's one of the mega challenges that they face. And so as part of this give back to society through social procurement, sustainability, call it whatever you want. But it's my way of contributing to society by helping people who face barriers to employment getting jobs. I don't know. That's a long rant.
No, that's right. And I mean, you've touched on so many valuable points there. And, one of the pieces that I can take away from here and our listeners can take away is, there is opportunities there for veterans and their families, and it's the ability to be able to step into those organisations, have, I guess, the courage, the bravery about, putting yourself out there, networking, connecting in with people, having a chat, and, just starting somewhere and exploring opportunities. Now, for someone, that wouldn't necessarily know where to look, you've already given them a little bit of a little bit of a strategy there.
Get on, have a look.
Have a look at the
people out
veteran
there.
employment commitment. Which companies are connected
Yep.
to looking out for veterans? Connecting in with organisations like Soldier On, connecting in with Ironside Resources. Things like that are a good starting point to be able to start to build and develop your network.
Yeah, network is the key. Like if you're wanting to find a job, a network is important. If you're wanting to find, informal ways to catch up and other veterans, because it's really isolating. Like for me, like being at Sterling, surrounded by people wearing black t-shirts under their cams, no one questioned it.
Yeah.
Even going to Cerberus, I felt like an outsider there because I wore the Dolphins on my uniform and I wore a black t-shirt. And everyone's like, everyone would give you the side eye and be like, oh, what are you doing over here? And so there wasn't a lot of submariners at Cerberus. And one of my best mates, Robbo, he and I were on one of the boats together and we still catch up all the time. He lives just down the road from me. And one of my other best mates, Will, I was so lucky to watch his transition journey. He went out before me. So he had the balls to do it. And I just thought, yep, Will's got it. I reckon I'll give it a go. And I think having a couple of key veterans around me has been really important for overall health and well-being and, motivation to get out into community and do things. And you don't need heaps and heaps of friends. And the very nature of the military means you move around a bit and you do go from unit to unit. And those people, while you're with them in that unit, they're your brothers and sisters. They have you back while you're asleep. And that's so important.
Mm.
But the harsh reality is that everybody moves on.
Yeah.
And those people, whilst you might move from one unit, one boat to another boat, whatever, and there's still the same camaraderie there. But when you're out when you transition or when you go somewhere different to a new community or a new posting where you're an outsider, it's really hard. It's really isolating. It can be really lonely. And that's one thing that I've definitely felt over the years of, especially since leaving and especially since trying to downplay my service and say, like the one sentence thing, submarines, decade, engineering, 3 words, got it. And it's very, whilst you're explaining and downplaying it to the civilian, what you're doing is you're actually criticizing your own service.
Yeah.
And that,
right.
That's not a good thing to do. And one thing is that whilst I've hammered on about employment being a good baseline, there's so much more that you can do. There's so much more to holistic well-being, and that means tapping into services where you can. I've been seeing the same psych for 5 years.
Yeah.
And that's been really important to me. I've always found it pretty difficult to talk about mental health with a lot of people, but by having the same continuity of service with my psych, that's meant a lot to me, and it's just an outlet. And I've got a wonderful family around me, my wife and my 2 kids, and they're everything to me.
Well, I was going to ask you, so there's all these different networks and strategies that would help you, with vocation. But vocation is one part of our life. There was also our family, our friends, and as you've mentioned, in service, you can rotate, through many different postings. Your friends and your networks might change. And even though you wear the same uniform, you are going to change those circles that you hang out with. Now, when you transition out of defence, obviously, again, there's another change. So tell us a little bit about, what does that network look like to you now?
Yeah, well, and that's one thing that's I think that's what you're getting at is when you leave the Defence Force, you lose your community. You when you are so tight knit in a particular unit and you're intimately comfortable with the platform or whatever it is that you're doing, when you step away from that, it all disappears overnight. when I drove out the gates at Cerberus on that day, I was like, "What now?"
Yeah.
You know, like, "Who even am I?" type thing. And
Mm.
and a lot of I've typically always done this is I've created my social and community from the job that I've been doing, whether I was in the bush or I was working at Rio Tinto or, Navy, whatever. Like that's typically where it started for me as my social circle. Um, but yeah, you lose that sense of self, you lose that identity, you lose that sense of even self-worth. Like, okay, well, if I'm not doing this, what does it even mean? And I think that's where it's so important to stay connected with veterans if you can. Like, and it's if you move to a new area, God, that must be tough.
Mm.
But that's where you can, go to an RSL, go to other veteran sporting events, team up with Invictus, whatever it may be. Just put yourself out there, and it's hard. And as a dad of, when I got out 6 years ago, my kids were pretty small then. I was in the trenches of like child rearing, and I definitely deprioritized my own community because of the family. Like if we'd lived away from each other for years. So like my wife and kids lived in Victoria and I lived in WA on a submarine for years. So that was really hard.
Yeah, that'd been tough.
Yeah, that was really, really hard because my wife's from Melbourne, from South Gippsland, and her community's here. And she was studying to be a teacher at the time. And we were over in Perth, and like my son had just been born. He was like 6 months old. And then I had to go to sea.
Mm.
And so my wife's like, well, if you're not even here, why am I here? And so we made a really tough decision as a family that my wife would be better off moving back in with her parents in Victoria. When I had a 2.5-year-old and a 6-month-old, moved back in with her parents, and I was at sea on a submarine. That was really tough. We did that we lived separately for about 3 years while I did a really intensive period at sea on one of the submarines. And, I remember clearly 2015, I dropped Catherine and the kids at the in-laws. It was Valentine's Day. And then I got home, went on a plane, and I was at sea for basically the whole year. I didn't see my wife and kids until the 24th of December. So the day before Christmas.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
I missed like the whole year basically. And that was really hard. Like I did all kinds of deployments that year.
Mm.
That was an interesting submarine year, but it was a tough year for me. Like, being away from the kids, and, my wife is basically a single mum,
Yeah. Wow.
with a 6-month-old child and a 2.5-year-old toddler, like, and yeah, the fact that we did that for a couple of years, and, 2015 was probably an exception. That year was significantly larger. I did one deployment that was nearly 7 months.
Mm.
And then there was all the pre-deployment stuff that happened earlier in the year. So, and then 2016 I was at sea again, 2017 at sea again. And then, and that's what sort of led me to explore a posting at recruit school, was because it got me out of the squadron. Whilst I love the squadron and it was everything to me, like the divorce rate for submariners is, look, I'm not going to make up stats, but it's huge.
Yeah.
Most submariners have gone through a divorce. Like most of the old ones or ones with children, like divorce rate in submarine community is high. But I often think that one of the things that got me through that period was the fact that ignorance was bliss. When you're in a tin can under the ocean, there's nothing. There's no connectivity, there's no emails. You just you're isolated. And you're doing exactly what a submarine's supposed to do, which is disappear off the face of the earth. That's what a submarine is supposed to do. And that also means that you don't have any connections, no contact, and you kind of just got on with it, right? So the bits where I struggled was when we would come home. Like the submarine would pull alongside and we'd all go home. And I had a house, near the beach in Rockingham, and I just lived there by myself. And that bit there, when I was alongside and doing maintenance or we were doing short runnings, I would fly across when I could.
Mm.
But being home with contact for the kids, that was the hardest part. That was really hard. Ringing up the end of the day and being like, hey, I'd see the kids and I'd see my wife, and it was that was hard. That was harder than being away on a submarine. Like being away on a submarine, and I don't know whether that makes me a psychopath or not, but like being able to just disconnect and just focus holistically on being at sea on a submarine was easier than being home and trying to hold it together. With my family living in Victoria and me being in WA. So
Mm.
I don't know how people can go to, on a ship or have a unit that has access to email. Like that to me sounds terrifying. And I know that what my experience is probably the minority of experiences of people like with separation anxiety. Um, so that's why it's so important that when you look at veterans, you look at the families, because the families are often doing it tough themselves because they're operating without a dad, a mum, an auntie, and uncle. Like it's the families that get left behind that need to be acknowledged as well. And I just think that it's really tough when you ring and you end up just hanging up feeling worse. You're
Mm.
supposed to, your family's supposed to be there for you. And I struggled. That's when I was really keen on chasing that posting at recruit school. And so when I got that posting and I got to reestablish myself with the family, I had to be very careful not to come in and bulldoze anything. Why are you doing this? Why? Because I used to see it. I see a lot of people, a lot of submariners, a lot of other people would come home from deployments and they would be critical of the family structure and why things would happen. But then what you've got to remember is that when that family unit is at home by themselves without the serving member, they're in survival mode. And so I did get a bit of coaching before I came back to Victoria. And it was a real lesson in humility for me. Like how to come back into the family structure and not mess it up
Yeah, right.
and
Yeah.
not be critical. And,
Mm.
I was like, why are we doing that? We shouldn't be doing this. But I was like, no, I have to, remember my wife and kids have been in survival mode for years now. And it took a while to integrate back together as a family. Um, but I think I'm really blessed. I've been married for 12 years now. I got a 13-year-old daughter now and an 11-year-old son, and we've got a great family unit. But it took a while to reestablish myself, and I think that's why I deprioritized staying connected with other veterans because I
Mm.
was so desperate to reconnect with my own family. And then what that meant was that outside of my family, I didn't have much. I didn't have many mates. I had a couple of really close mates like Will and Robbo, um, and a few other really important people in my life that I'd served with. And look, it's funny. Like we've got this phone in our pocket with all these contacts. It's not the same as being near people. Like,
Yeah.
so I think that's one thing that veterans need to obviously prioritize family. Um, but in the absence of family, or once you feel like you've got your family together, like once you feel like as a unit you're doing okay, it's time to look after yourself.
Joe, you've answered so many wonderful, I guess, questions that we were going to lead into, and you've given some really good insight to service, transition, and strategies that people can take away and use, as they navigate, life after service. Um, for those that are thinking about transitioning and yet haven't decided to do it, they might continue to serve, they might not, they might make a decision to go, you know what, I value maybe spending more time with my family now. Or for those that may be facing an unfortunate career change because of a medical transition, you know, what's one thing that you think you could leave them with?
I think you've got to work out what's your why. Why do you want to leave? And I think for me it was family. Like
Mm.
the only place that I was ever going was back to sea, back in a submarine, back away from the kids and the wife because they weren't coming back to WA. So it was really clear for me. In fact, I remember when my chief handed me my promotion signal and it said Cerberus, and I just went, "That's the end of my career." I knew at that point, as soon as that posting signal, that promotion signal I was holding, I was like, and that is my ticket out of here. And I've been pretty clear that because of the way my mental health was at the time and the fact that I was living away from my wife and kids, like I was done. But I chose to walk away on my terms. And I realized that, as you mentioned before with medical separation, sometimes that's not an option. You get thrust into whatever it is that's put on you. And if you don't want to leave, but you're being forced to, well, I'm really sorry. That is a really, really unfortunate circumstance. And it's out of your control. And so if there was one thing I could put onto people who are thinking about discharging, it would be to prioritize what's important. Think about what you value. And if it's family, if it's a career change, if it's a locality change that you're after, because we realize that being a serving member, you're sort of stuck in only a couple of key locations around the country, right? Like not everybody wants to live in Newcastle or Townsville. But if you want to go, you've got to look at what's important. And my advice is take your time. If you have time, take the time, build a network, look at your education credentials. Like for a lot of enlisted people, you may get partial or no qualifications. So chase those qualifications. I did that. I upgraded some of my qualifications before I left. I went to TAFE for a bit, finished a higher level qualification than what the Navy gave me. So I think take that time and set yourself up. And I think that the way that you do that is by starting to build a network. I know LinkedIn's pretty scary, but just get on it. Everybody uses it. If you want to get a job, you kind of got to be visible on LinkedIn. And I don't like social media. I don't use it particularly well. And it seems very self-promotional and very yuck, and I don't like it. But you've got to have some runs on the board. and
yeah.
Like people need to know who you are. If they go to Google you, like I've done it. I've interviewed people and you Google them. And so you be aware of your public persona. Like I certainly wouldn't be getting into really odd sort of wormholes on debates online. I would be cognizant of how you're placed in society, and take the time to get the quals, to do courses, build that network. And I think that whilst the discharge process can be really long and drawn out, and that can be really negative. I found that quite a negative thing. I found it really challenging. But while I had that time, I went and did those courses, and you can start to connect. And it's when you're in defense, you've got access to everything. It's all just there. You just look it up on the intranet, whatever it's called. You can look up what support is there in this location. How do I access housing? All these type of things. So if you have time, use it well. Because you can't get a job straight away. That's one of the hard things. And I think that's my advice, is use that time wisely, and just connect with good people.
Yeah. Look, there's some wise words you've shared today, and
so wise.
Joe, I want to say thank you so much for sharing your story of service, your experience, and being very open and transparent about, your family, your service, and obviously transition into civilian workforce. It's important, to connect and network, for work, but also our community. So thank you for joining us today, Joe, and thank you for sharing your story.
Thanks for having me. It's been good.
You're welcome. Well, thank you for tuning into this episode of Contemporary Voices of Bravery. We look forward to you joining us for our next episode, where we'll look at another veteran and family member's journey and career beyond service. This podcast is proudly presented by Soldier On. Soldier On is a not-for-profit veteran support organisation delivering a range of services to enable serving and ex-serving veterans and their families to thrive. Should today's podcast elicit any personal concern, a list of support services can be found in our show notes. Saluting Their Service, Contemporary Voices of Bravery is a production of Art Videography and Soldier On. The Saluting Their Service, Contemporary Voices of Bravery podcast was funded by the Department of Veterans Affairs. Thanks for listening.